Well, it is 7 o'clock, and we will get underway. So no doubt some people will join us in the coming 5 or 10 minutes as they eat their meals and settle down after work. But for those of you who are here, a very warm welcome to this program. My name is Jeff Barlow. I'm president of Healesville CORE, Healesville Community Renewable Energy Incorporated. And we got a grant from the Victorian government through Sustainability Victoria of just under $500,000 last year to set up the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub. And one of the ideas behind that was that the hub would have paid staff in order to generate a whole lot of activities around the region, the greater Yarra Valley and Ranges region. And we did that. One of the programs that we decided to set up was a program run through community houses and living and learning centres, which we would run as a trial in 3 centres. One was at Eltham, one in Emerald, and one in Pakenham. And the Eltham one was run much earlier this year, or maybe at the end of last year. And these 2, of course, are taking place now. And these will be the last events that we'll be running for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub. And we're very pleased that we've been able to get these off the ground. So we've got 4 teachers for you, and your teacher tonight is Glenn Morris. Glenn is from a business, his own business called SolarQuip, up on Mount Toolabawong, where he also has an energy lab, and he's got lots of good stuff in store for you tonight. Before we go any further, what I would like to do is do an acknowledgement of country, and like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that most of us are on tonight. And I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians present tonight. I also would like to apologise to you for the late notification that you received about the course tonight, your enrolment. I think that Mary contacted you and probably explained that they had problems with their servers for the last week or 2, and so they had problems contacting everybody. But hopefully after this glitch, we'll be able to sail along for the rest of the program for the next 4 weeks or so. I'd like to explain a little bit about Healesville CORE, because this course is really about community renewable energy, and Healesville CORE is an organisation that is focused around providing leadership for the Healesville community in this whole field of renewable energy. Healesville CORE was started in 2017 by me. I was inspired to try to provide some leadership in the local community because of the lack of leadership that was happening at a national level in relation to climate change and the global climate emergency. And I was getting quite angry and depressed about that, and wanted to try and put that emotional energy to some sort of use in the community. So we set up Healesville CORE. And our first event in Healesville, we got 230 people along to that, and that was a great start to the beginning of our organisation. And we're run by volunteers and with volunteers using grant funding from mainly the Yarra Ranges Council and some other organisations, local businesses and the local bank and private donations. What we do is we organise events for the local community to teach people about what renewable energy is and how they can benefit from it. We also run community offers and bulk buys, things like solar panels and batteries, heat pumps, reverse cycle air conditioners, and a few years ago, we also set up a training program to train some volunteers, and Glenn was involved in that process, to train some of our volunteers to provide free advice to our local community on home energy efficiency. And we expanded that program when the hub got underway by running a 3-day course at Box Hill Institute. And we had over 20 people training in that program, and they're now out in the community providing advice to people on a voluntary basis, and these are free consultations. The course, this course was my idea. I come from an educational background, and I'm really passionate about the value of education, particularly for adults, and providing opportunities for adults to learn in all sorts of different contexts, both theoretical learning and practical learning. In this course, we're trying to do both. You're learning a lot. You will be learning a lot about community renewable energy, by people talking, but also we'll be having the field day up at Glenn's laboratory in November. I think it's about mid-November that we'll be holding that, and we hope that all of you will be able to participate in that, and Glenn will no doubt talk more about that later. I'd like to thank the Emerald Community House and the Pakenham Living and Learning Centre for hosting this program for us. And they also made application to the Education Department as well to get some funding for the program to supplement the funding from Sustainability Victoria. So it's really a joint community effort from Healesville Core, from the Hub, Victorian Government, Sustainability Victoria, Education Department, and the community houses as well. It's really exciting to have such a lot of organisations involved in this program. And we're hoping through the videoing of the program and making it available to others, that gradually this program will spread around to other community centres and living and learning centres right throughout Victoria, and perhaps later around Australia. Also like to thank Healesville Core for the work that they've done in supporting this program, particularly since the hub has closed down now, and all of this work has been done pro bono by Healesville Core, which has now enabled the course to happen. What we're hoping that we'll achieve is that we will interest all of the participants on the course in community renewable energy, so that you'll be much more informed and aware about what it is, about how communities can benefit from renewable energy, how you can keep money in the local communities, and with developments in modern technology and electronics and so on, really take advantage of new ideas that Glenn will no doubt talk with you about tonight, to enable much more sharing of renewable energy within the local communities. The program has 4 teachers: Glenn Morris tonight, Dr. Morag Mackay next week, followed by Lucinda Flynn in the 3rd week, and then Gerald Ahrens from Como Energy in the last week. And then the cream, of course, on the cake is the field day visit to Glenn's lab on Mount Toolabawong, and also the Wandin Yarra Valley Water Solar Array, and I think you'll find that a very interesting development as well. And we want to also try and fit in a couple of sustainably built houses as well. So I won't take any more of your time. I'll come back at the end of the session, but I would point out to you that there is a question in the chat function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, and you can click on that. There's a question from Morag for her next session, which towards the end of the session, after you've heard Glenn speak and you know all about the sorts of technologies that are available, she would like to know what type of community energy projects interest you the most. And that will help her in the planning of her particular session, and we'll send that information to her. We have Oh, yes, a message from Christine Powell. We are here just without a camera. Okay, thanks, Christine. So I'd like to introduce you to Glenn. I first got to know Glenn when Healesville Core got underway back in 2017, and we invited him to be one of our primary speakers in a number of our events to educate the local community in renewable energy. He was always very well received, and what I liked about Glenn's work, which has continued in all of the sessions I've heard him deliver, is that he digests very technical information and presents it in a way that's comprehensible to most people without a technical background. Glenn, as I said earlier, has got his own business, SolarQuip, on Mount Toolabawong, on the Murramurra Cooperative Community, and also has his lab there. And Glenn, I'd like to give you a very warm welcome tonight, and hand you over to the students who are here now. And I'll come back later in the session, just before the finish. Over to you now, Glenn.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. And really, congratulations, Jeff, on all the work you've done, setting up Healesville Core, enthusing so many people, bringing a team with you, getting wonderful bits of grant funding from all sorts of sources. It's amazing what you've managed to do. So turning that anger and frustration into a really positive outcome. So hats off to you, Jeff. Cool. So welcome, everyone. Jeff's done the Indigenous acknowledgement, so I'll skip that one. I'm going to start with a little bit of background about me so you know where I'm coming from, but I'd like to say from the very onset that this is kind of a workshop environment. You might notice that this is a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. That means you can interact with me and the audience. So there's many ways you can do this. The low-key way is actually ask questions in the chat. You might actually want to speak. You can just kind of interrupt me. I really don't mind, but I'll be pausing at various points throughout and going, so any questions so far? So, you can always wait for those. You can do the uber polite Zoom thing and use the raise hand symbol. If I manage to notice it, it'll appear on the participants tab for me. But also, this whole session is being recorded. So if you have to duck out for any reason, you'll be able to watch the recording at a later date. So that's being managed by someone who you can't see at the moment, which is Tom. You'll just look, his little name will come up as Healesville Core. But thank you, Tom, for managing the tech side of this. So my rough program for tonight is kind of a spiral process. We're going to be talking about community renewable energy, but community starts with individuals and individual choices and how they flow, and then community reflects that. And also the benefit of a community flows back to the individual. So I'll be kind of talking about some, macro solutions and some sort of large scale stuff. Also a little bit about the technology, because that's kind of my strength, is the technology, and some of the opportunities, as Jeff alerted to, saving money, basically keeping money within a community through having community renewable energy projects. So that's kind of the rough plan. I'll start with just a picture, because Jeff's already said that you'll be coming to visit my Smart Energy Lab, and I'll just bring up there. So this is where I live. It's on one of Australia's oldest intentional communities, founded in 1974. It's called Murramurra Cooperative Community. It's on top of Mount Toolabawong, and we sit at about 600 to 800 metres above sea level. It gets pretty cold in winter. We get the old dusting of snow. It's also where I've built what I call the Smart Energy Lab. So if you look at that picture there, somewhere in the middle of that is a whole bunch of houses, but there's also a whole bunch of buildings, which are my labs. And for those of you who'd be coming on the site visit, which is on the 13th of November on a Saturday, we'll be getting a tour around the property, including things like we've got a bit of everything. We've got micro hydro, small wind, we've got tracking solar systems. You can probably see one being built there in this picture in the paddock, big long thing. we've got a huge range of battery storage systems because I do a lot of testing and also training and product evaluation for companies. So it's a bit of everything. It's also a place where you can see sustainable building practices. So for those who are coming on the tour on the 13th of November, we'll be looking at things like straw bale construction, which is my house actually and my neighbours, and how you get a high R value in the design of a building. Passive solar, which is really a no-brainer, but it can save you more money than any electrical system can. It's just design the house the right way from day one. So we'll be looking at passive solar. Also, a little bit about sustainability in the broader sense, things like resilience, things like food systems, etc., because we actually have a food production system here. It's not 100%, but it helps. I must admit, COVID really kind of made us wake up a little bit. When the lockdowns hit, we thought, gee, what if it's going to be really difficult to get food from the supermarket? So we've got quite a bit of area under production. So that's the Smart Energy Lab, as I call it, but it's also where I live, in the middle of those houses. Just a bit more introduction, and also this is kind of where you can do a little bit of self-directed learning. I actually make a lot of content, a lot of teaching and content, and also a lot of information videos for the industry. And I've got two main channels. One's technical and one's more kind of about the social side of off-grid living. This one is Smart Energy Lab. So if you've got YouTube handy, you can just type in Smart Energy Lab. Don't do it now because a nasty little noisy me will pop up and start speaking. So that can be a bit annoying. So there's a whole bunch of videos there. I think I've been doing it for years now. I've also got I do a lot of online courses. So these are probably more aimed though at professionals in the industry. So things like solar installers, designers, engineers, sales professionals. I do occasionally have general public people, but it is very much a technical course. And so I run those online quite regularly. I have this channel for off-grid. So this is, I call it Everything Off-Grid, where I interview people. So it's not all about me, it's about people and at the community where I live and other people. I actually went to the Off-Grid Living Festival this year and interviewed a whole bunch of exhibitors. So you can probably see some little excerpts from that. But also the people who live here at Miramura Cooperative and what their passions are and things like how they built their houses, for instance. A lot of them are alternative building technology. So that's another opportunity for self-directed learning, is actually just watch a video. There we go. And I also have a bit of fun and I have a show. Well, it's actually been on hold for a while, but I'll get back into it, where I do a tech show dressed like a bit of a rapper. I'm certainly not very good at that. But anyway, that's my tech show, Toolbox Tech Talk. It used to be every Sunday during COVID. I think I did about 140 shows, but there we go. Anyway, let's get into the meat of it. And for those who just arrived, all you've done is miss the introductions. You haven't missed any of the content. And I'm actually going to rerun a few slides, which I've probably, if you've come to any of my presentations at Healesville Core already, you would have seen some of these. But it's just to kind of get us thinking about why renewable energy, and particularly the technology that we might be looking at. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, it is a 2-hour session, and I like to give people the opportunity, certainly because of the luxury you're probably sitting at home, is to have a short break in the middle. So we'll have a short 5-minute, let's call it a comfort stop at around 8:05, something like that. I'll just blank the screen. We'll come back in 5 minutes. So that gives you a chance to grab a drink of water or stretch your legs or something. You've got to stay sharp. Once again, reminding people, and it's quite a good time to start thinking about this, is typing some questions into the chat as I'm speaking. So if I raise something and you go, oh, I wish you'd say a bit more about blah, 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 there we go. Someone's already done it. Glenn said the field day was Saturday. I thought it was Sunday. Gee, have I made a mistake already? I think you're probably right on that. It is, in fact, a Sunday. So thank you, Christine. Yeah, it's Sunday, the 13th of November. We haven't slipped the calendar something magically. So there you go. The chat session works really well. So this is a question I often ask people because my background, I should have mentioned, is I used to be a solar installer on roofs. These days it's more of a consultancy, getting too lazy to climb up on roofs. Also, I work I've been a consult for governments as well on sort of projects, and I'm on the standards committee, so I have a lot to do with the technical standards. But when customers would come to me and say, "Oh, Glenn, how much is a solar system, a battery system, or what?" One of my first questions is why? What's your motivation? So this is me starting at the personal before we broaden out to the community side of things. What's your motivation for wanting whatever, solar power, solar hot water, battery storage? And these are kind of like three common reasons. Now, people aren't always honest when they answer these questions. Sometimes they go, "I want to save the world," but actually they want to save money, but that's all right. You can do both. But it's important to be clear about these because sometimes the choices you make could be wrong. In fact, there are cheaper ways of saving money and producing clean energy and being more self-reliant than perhaps installing a battery system. So just beware that all those things that are shiny aren't necessarily the best options. There's some really, really easy ways to save money. And, I just go on about this a bit because it's surprising that the fact that if you've got a contract with your electricity retailer in Victoria particularly, which has got the highest churn rate in Australia, you've got 1 year of usually a rather good deal. So you will have been approached perhaps, or you may have chosen to take up an offer, and it'll be quite a good rate, but it defaults after 1 year typically back to the default plan. It's commonly referred to as the loyalty tax. So Adam Pearce, I think, coined that term. I love it. The loyalty tax. You don't want to be loyal to your electricity retailer because they won't be loyal to you. So it's a very good idea to compare plans when your 1 year sweet deal is up and move on. It's very easy to change retailers. You don't have to get any equipment changed. It's just done with a phone call. Sometimes it's a door knocker, but beware, they don't always provide you with the best options. So there's a website, the Victorian Government website for comparing. There are even commercial services that do this, and there are even these days some fancy products that do it for you that you can install in your home that monitor your energy use and then will automatically suggest the best plan. They're not a hoax. They're not run by a company that is trying to sell you their plan. It's actually an independent metering service. But there you go. These things are available. There's the cheapest electricity, by the way, is the electricity you never used. They call them negawatts, negative watts. And that's as a result of choosing efficient appliances. It doesn't seem very exciting, like to buy an efficient appliance. It might give you a warm feeling inside and a much better feeling when you pay your electricity bills, but no one notices. And unfortunately, solar has got very popular, partly because it's so visible and it kind of like shouts out that I've got clean energy, but actually not using energy is clean too. So finding those really efficient appliances, how do you do that? I mean, you could wander around a white goods store looking at the star rating program. A bit confusing because you've got to remember that the stars are proportional to the size of the appliance. So, a 5-star big fridge, it might actually still use more power than a 3-star small fridge because it's the size difference that matters as well. There is, though, a very good website. Apparently they're updating it. It's called energyrating.gov.au. I'm going to bring up some of these websites later, and you may have received an email with that self-directed learning, and this is one of them, is to go and visit this website, energyrating.gov.au. Try and find some of the appliances that you've got in your home and see how they rate compared to, you can sort them from most efficient to least efficient within a category. So let's pick my favorite one, your fridge at home. If you don't know how to find out its make and model, it's typically on a little label inside the door. It's pretty common on modern fridges. You open the door, there's a label, there will be a model number. You type it into energyrating.gov.au search field and it'll find it. And then you can go, let's see how it rates compared to everything else in its class. So you might set it to similar size fridges, for instance, and see how it rates. So that's a nice little exercise to do. Why do I pick on refrigerator? It is probably the only appliance you ever buy that when you install it, you never turn it off again. Like you go on holiday, you probably still leave it on. No one wants to have to empty their fridge out, throw away a whole bunch of food. So efficiency really matters because it's going to be using power 24/7 for the rest of its life. And sometimes for a bit longer when it becomes, the so-called beer fridge in the back shed, which is a bit unfortunate because it's probably at end of life by that point in terms of efficiency. So there's a bit of homework for you. Reducing energy can be as simple as actually just paying attention. Once again, this is not a very exciting thing, but turning stuff off, getting into the habit of looking for unnecessary appliances, and also those sneaky ones that you don't even know you've got on. Like, you think you've turned your TV off with the remote, but there's a whole lot of little lights everywhere, sort of on the consoles at the back, and then there's a DVD player, and there's maybe a stereo, and they've all got little lights on, and they're all using power, and they're probably using it 24/7. So being able to actually get rid of some of those, what they call phantom loads, they're not doing any useful work. Plug packs are another one. You might have a plug pack for a phone charger or something. You might not even have your phone plugged in. If it's warm to touch, it's using power. There's a simple test. If it's warm, it's using power. So look around for opportunities there. Now, I've kind of scheduled these 5 points in order, I would say, of ease and effectiveness, so straight up. So getting down the bottom here, now you may have done all these other things. You may have got a better plan for your electricity retailer. You may have chosen efficient appliances, reduced your energy use by just some sensible turning stuff off. But then it comes to how do you generate your own energy? And that's where solar panels come along. Solar panels and solar hot water or heat pumps, they all are renewable energy devices. Now, you might think, how is a heat pump a solar power generator? Well, actually, it's taking the energy from the air, because remember, air gets heated by the sun, and it takes that low-grade energy from the air with a little bit of electricity, and I'm just talking about 1/3 of what you would normally use to heat water, and transform that energy to a higher temperature level through what's known as the refrigeration cycle. So it's actually in reverse, it works as a heater. So it's a very efficient way of heating water or heating space. So reverse cycle air conditioners use the same principle for heat as opposed to cooling. Installing solar panels, or PV for short, photovoltaic panels. Look, if you're not aware of this, Australia is the gold standard for adoption of solar panels. We have 3 million homes with solar panels on them. We're concerned now. We're running out of freestanding buildings to put solar panels on in the residential space. Though, don't you worry, people are already sort of upgrading their not very old systems, unfortunately. So the market is still going very strong. So with the highest per capita in the world adoption of rooftop solar, and that's because Australians get it. We're a sunny country. Melbourne people feel a bit sad about our weather, but actually we're still really sunny. We're much more sunny than Germany in Melbourne. And Germany used to be the solar power capital of the world back 20 years ago. They'd had some of the biggest installations, mostly large-scale solar. So, and the UK, similar to Germany, pretty not that sunny, but they've got a lot of solar. So Australia, we're ahead of the game, even in places like Tasmania and Melbourne. But once you get inland, it's just the next order. In fact, I call Australia is the solar superpower of the world. Really only places like North Africa, the Gobi Desert, and the middle of the Pacific Ocean are better places for solar. And there's not much land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so that's not a great choice. We only lack a few things, which is, well, until recently we lacked the political will, but we also lacked some of the electrical infrastructure to distribute energy from the very sunniest parts of Australia. You might have heard of programs or plans or proposals such as the Sun Cable, which is to basically export solar energy to Singapore from Australia. It's not a joke, and it's looking like it may well happen. So it will probably be the biggest solar generator on the planet. And, that's because Australia, certainly inland, has very little cloud, very high solar radiation, and that is a large area of land. And so all of that added together means that we really are the solar superpower. Incidentally, we're also potentially one of the wind solar powers as well, because wherever there's solar energy, heating water, like the ocean, creating temperature differentials between the land and the ocean, you'll get wind. And so we've got a huge coastline as well. So there's a couple of feel-good things about our potential for renewable energy. Now, someone's asked in the chat here, Glenn, are you going to send these slides? Actually, the recording that's being done by Tom will be the finished product for this. I hadn't planned on actually sending the slides. I'm sending them to Tom so he can include them in the recording in beautiful high definition. So that's probably the best way to look at them. The last point on my list here is, what about installing battery storage? Now, battery storage has become a bit of an exciting topic because it does more than just store energy so you can store some of the day's surplus and use it at nighttime. It also provides you with some resilience, some potential for backup. I should put a condition on that. Not all battery storage systems are designed for backup, but predominantly most of them will. I'd say probably the vast majority do provide a backup solution. And that is not just a feel-good thing, but it's a very pragmatic thing, particularly here in the Yarra Ranges where we've had, a lot of storms, etc., that have to bring down power lines in the Dandenong Ranges for weeks on end. Be able to have some storage that can help you get through those events is pretty handy. So it can save you some money by using your surplus solar at nighttime. It could give you some backup, which is a nice feeling. But just be aware that the payback is still very long. Now, simple payback, we're not talking net present value if you're an accountant. We're talking simple payback. That means if it costs $10,000, how long does it take to save you $10,000? The thing is, it's probably going to be around the warranty period at the moment because batteries are still pretty expensive. And the big difference between a battery and a solar panel is the solar panel collects free energy from the sun. A battery only stores it. So it's not a generator, it's just a storage device. But there you go. Now, I will talk a bit about community scale storage as well, but we're just focusing at the onset a little bit on just the individual. Now, how are you going, everyone? I can just see there's no more questions in the chat. If you don't know how to use the chat, you've got two options. You can find out, which is by moving your mouse, if you're on a computer, to the bottom of the screen. Depending on what sort of device you're on, the chat field might be hidden or might pop up when you move around. Or you can stick your hand up. These days, by the way, if you've got a recently new version of Zoom, it actually detects that you're holding your hand up. I'm not sure if it's going to do it to me. You sort of just hold your hand up for a little while and it suddenly appears on the screen. But I think because I'm a presenter, it's not going to do it. And if all else fails, you could just take yourself off mute and go, excuse me, Glenn, I have a question, but I can't get any of these other technologies to work. So there you go. You're welcome to try all of those options. And I'm just trying to get all of your faces on the screen so I can see if there's anyone doing anything like that. Nope. Okay. Yeah, so a little bit more on batteries. Now, battery is a storage device that stores energy. It stores it as chemical energy, takes electricity, stores it as chemical energy, and that can be reversed. But there's another storage device, and that is a hot water service. It's actually an energy storage system. It's nothing rocket science about it. But if you can divert surplus solar to heat water, and water is a daily service that you require, a bit like electricity, it's effectively a battery. So it's a really great way to use some of that surplus solar. And a hot water service, typically in a domestic installation, is one of the biggest loads. It's often the biggest load in your home. So most of the, energy, not most, but the largest amount of energy on the little pie diagram is actually heating and cooling on that little 38% on that example there. Can't remember where I got these stats from, but I think they're from a government website. But there you go. And how much does a hot water service cost? Well, if you already got one, nothing. There you go. But there is some technology associated with being able to divert surplus into the heating the tank. Some are very simple. Basically, switch the tank on when there's surplus solar. Others use what's known as a power diverter, and takes just the little bit that would otherwise be spilled out to the grid and used to heat the water in your tank. So there you go. A water heater is actually effectively a battery that you may already have. So it can be a lot cheaper option than buying a chemical storage device. But you do need solar to capture that solar to heat that battery. Cool. Another question I get an awful lot is my roof suitable for solar? Now, this is actually where I've got some new material I'm going to be introducing shortly. Not everyone actually has their own roof. Now, I've shown a freestanding home here, and there's something like 6 million freestanding homes in Australia, but there's actually 1 in 10 people in Australia live in a multiple occupancy building, an apartment building, for instance, and they don't necessarily own their own roof. Now, that is the beginnings of where community renewable energy can sort of kick in, which is how can people share the energy production of a roof? Now, this is me foreshadowing a technology which I'll come to in a little bit, but I just want to point out that it's not necessary to actually own your own roof to be able to benefit from renewable energy. So, just to answer the question I've stated on this slide, is my roof suitable for solar power? There's a kind of sense that the sun in the southern hemisphere predominantly is in the north. That means it rises in the east, traverses across at an angle from the horizontal across the northern face of the building and sets in the west. So you would think that the north side of your house is the best place for solar panels. Now, that may well be true if you want to get the maximum production out of your system. That means you want to make the most kilowatt hours of electrical energy possible. That is true. Facing north will give you the best production off a fixed system, fixed array. That means it's not moving, which is what just about every domestic system would be. But when you look at the economics, it's not necessarily true that that's the best option, because you may not be home during the day and your system is working really well when you're not there. What happens to that surplus solar energy that you didn't get to use? Unless you have a battery, it's going to be, I love this term, spilled to the grid. There's a saying that an oil spill is a tragedy, a solar spill is a sunny day. So spilling energy to the grid is exporting. Sometimes you get a benefit for that, what's known as an export incentive, but these days they're really wound back to almost nothing, just a few cents in Victoria for exporting the solar. Though some retailers are offering better options, but like they do, there's always a catch. Sometimes you get a nice feed-in tariff, but you get a higher electricity price or a higher daily use fee. They are in the business of making money after all. So that's one of the considerations is the economics of where you put your solar panels, not just the production of them, the maximum amount of energy. Now, just to give a really strong contrast here, I've just shown that a north-facing array in Melbourne, on average, will produce what's known as 4.67 peak sun hours. It's basically the amount of energy per square metre that's falling on your roof. I shouldn't say produce. That's the amount of energy falling on your roof on the north. But on the south, which you might think is the dark, cold, boring place that no one would ever put solar panels, it's 3.48 peak sun hours. That's the energy from the sun per square metre in kilowatt hours per square metre. So really, a south-facing roof in Melbourne, which you would probably think is a really bad idea, at 30-degree pitch as well, is 75% as good as a north-facing roof. So I'd use this extreme example just to say, actually, there is no wrong place to put solar panels. It's just different performance issues. Shading definitely can diminish their production, but orientation will have an impact. But then again, as I started to say, it's actually about the economics for many people. And if you're a person who is not at home during the day, you probably use energy at the ends of the day, the morning and the afternoon. And where is the sun in the morning? In the east. And where is the sun in the afternoon? In the west. So actually, having an array that faces east and west can often give you a better economic benefit, even though it produces less than a north-facing array. So there you go. I sometimes say east-west is the new north because it's a very popular choice.
Can I ask something, please, Glenn? So this, that's an annual average peak hours. So in winter, the south-facing roof, would you get any benefit from it?
It'll definitely be the poorest in wintertime. So there's about a 3-to-1 ratio in Melbourne from summer to winter in terms of the amount of solar energy. So it'll be down about 1 peak sun hour in wintertime on that south roof.
Okay.
So I've just done annual averages here because when you think about electricity prices, it's amortized over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Lyndall?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for asking the question. And I'm looking at the chat now. Just testing the comparison site rates seem to be more even than previously. Oh, that's interesting, Russell. To tell you the truth, Russell, I don't pay power bills because I'm off grid, so I don't really look at them very much. I've been off grid for 31 years. Wow, I should have a celebration. So there you go. So the next one is from Christine. I'm interested to know how much electricity our wood heater uses. Oh, that's an interesting one. So Christine, I presume your wood heater has a fan. Is that what you're referring to in terms of energy use? You can type your answer in there. Okay, good. So generally your slow combustion wood heaters with a glass door on the front, they may or may not have a water jacket as well. Some of them will have a fan that blows air around the inner skin. So there'll be a dual skinned firebox, and circulates some air around that, particularly at the top. And it actually gives you a much better thermal performance because rather than most of the heat still going up the chimney, a lot of it's blowing into the room. It's a very small fan. It will be something like a 20 to 30 watt fan. So think of it similar to your internet router or a couple of LED lights. It's not a big user. So I wouldn't feel too guilty about running that fan because it's actually going to give you a much better performance out of your wood heater. Yeah, and I see Christine says that she has solar, and of course winter there's not much sun. Yep, it can be pretty bleak in winter, but that's kind of, not every day is going to be a sunny day unless you live in Queensland, of course. Gosh, they have some of the best solar conditions on the East Coast. So thank you for those questions. I'm just checking if I haven't missed any. 1, 2, 3. Cool. All right, I'll just move on a little bit. Okay. Now this slide I actually took from the Clean Energy Council's Clean Energy report, which is actually the collection of data from what's known as the Clean Energy Regulator. Now that's a lot of words of clean energy, isn't it? If you've never heard of any of these things, the Clean Energy Regulator is a federal department responsible for, managing programs around clean energy. They regulate the economic incentives, and they also collect a lot of data. Because there are, and you probably already know this, healthy rebates for solar panels, also for solar hot water systems. Most of those are state-based ones, and things like lighting replacements and chimney balloons and all sorts of amazing things. But I'm focusing here on solar panels, and just interesting to see from 2010, over 11 years, how big the average system size has got. Now, I started installing on-grid solar in 2007. 1 kilowatt systems were more or less the go back then. 1 kilowatt. It's like it was just 6 little panels on your roof. It cost a fortune, like $14,000, but you got an $8,000 rebate, so you felt good about that. But those early adopters, thank you very much, early adopters. You really helped kickstart the solar industry in Australia. But look where we've got to now. The average system size is 8.5 kilowatts. Now that's a lot of panels, considering a typical panel is about 400 watts. So it's smothering the roof with panels. So your roof is often the limiting factor, or wherever you might be able to mount them. If you happen to be on a rural property, they can be ground mounted as well. What's that telling me is that people love solar, and more solar is often more savings. The way solar incentive schemes work for systems under 100 kilowatts, so that's really every domestic system. 100 kilowatts is a lot of solar panels. You can access a government rebate scheme known as the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme, and under that scheme, there are certificates generated when you put clean energy on your roof in the form of solar panels, and you get these certificates which are tradable. Now, you don't actually have to trade them because usually, almost always, the installation company or the solar retailer will discount the cost of your system by those certificates. Currently, the certificates would cover about a third of the cost of a conventional on-grid system with no battery storage. So it's actually still a very generous contribution. It is winding down though, so the scheme finishes in 2030, and each year it reduces by 1/15 of what it was in 2015. So the multiplier keeps going down, or the deeming period, I should say. So that incentive will probably fade out before 2030 because people will stop even applying for it because it'll be so small. But the good news is, even as the government incentive schemes being reduced at a gradual scale, rate over that last 15 years or so, the price of solar panels have tracked almost the same. So panels keep going down, rebates keep going down at the same rate, effectively the same benefit. So just beware, there is a little bit of marketing hoo-ha, usually around the end of each calendar year, where you'll see ads, rebates ending now, big loud letters all over on a TV ad or something. What they mean is it's reducing one more step towards 2030. So there will be a slight price change over that period. But once again, solar panels keep getting cheaper. I'm predicting they'll be negative and probably by 2030. Not quite, but they're getting very, very cheap. So why would you want to put so much solar on your home, by the way? Now, if you don't know what 8.5 kilowatts looks like, well, it's probably about 30-something panels. It will produce something like 50, 60 kilowatt hours a day in summer. The average home only uses about 20. What are you going to do with all that extra power? Now, the thing is, and this is where Melbourne has a real advantage, is every day isn't a perfect sunny day. So on those overcast days, Lyndall, when it's kind of a bit gloomy, your 8.5 kilowatt system is still putting out enough power to cover all of your consumption. So oversizing actually is a very sensible thing when it comes to a system design, and particularly because the rebate, I shouldn't say this, but it effectively makes panels free. So more panels don't actually push the cost up. It's the inverter and the labour associated with it that's the main cost. So yeah, bigger is better. In fact, Renew, formerly ATA, actually wrote a paper on this and did some research with their membership, and they called it, funnily enough, bigger is better. There you go. All right, questions rolling in. This is nice. Someone let Fiona in, apparently. Yes, has Fiona managed to get in? Can't see her name on the list. Oh, from Tasmania. Oh, welcome our Tasmanian guest. And there she is, I think. Okay, no more questions. All right, and moving on. So just to kind of give you the other end of the spectrum, what's known as large-scale solar. Large-scale solar basically is solar farms where there's paddocks full of panels. Technically, these will be under a different program called the Large-Scale Generation Scheme. And they just generate what's known as Large-Scale Generation Certificates, LGCs. And those certificates are also tradable and help with the cost of both building and funding these projects. Now, what's happened, look at that. There's an exponential growth from almost nothing in 2013 to some very tall yellow bars in 2021. And we're in 2022 right now, so I haven't got the latest ones. There'll be another step up. So large-scale solar has really rocketed in Australia, partly because it's just the cheapest way of generating electricity. It's hard to beat. I mean, just to give you a rough idea, you might be paying 25 to 35 cents a kilowatt hour from your retailer for electricity in Melbourne. Hopefully not much more than that. You can generate electricity at a large scale for like 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. There's plenty of margin for all the people in between to sell that energy and still sell it cheap. So the wholesale price might be down around, 2 or 3 cents, 4 or 5 cents maybe, depending on where it is. And usually the retail price of electricity is 1/3 wholesale, 1/3 distribution, and 1/3 the markup the retailer makes. So if you add those threes, it's still going to be way cheaper than what you're paying right now. So, yeah, large-scale solar is really going to bring down the cost of electricity, but quite a lot of these projects are still in their infancy. They're still being rolled out, or they still have to pay off the investment. So, all the cost of large-scale solar is upfront. The running costs are very, very low, as opposed to, say, coal-fired power stations and gas generation, where its ongoing costs are continuous. So that's a good story for Australia. But with these good stories, we do have some problems, and that is too much of a good thing, a bit like sugar, is not a good thing. And we have a problem with too much solar all at the same time in one place, which is the east coast of Australia. And so the market operator, Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO for short, has been really working hard to sort of solve this from a management point of view in terms of how do they manage all this renewable energy that is fairly peaky. And that's when utility scale storage, pumped hydro comes to the rescue. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we go on. Now, I wanted just to alert you to the fact that we are in Victoria, funnily enough, except I think someone's in Tasmania. And the Victorian government has been really great with setting up Solar Victoria, a dedicated government department to promote the uptake of solar power, and has got a whole bunch of solar rebate schemes. Now, there's not just solar, there's solar power, there's solar hot water, there's photovoltaic rebate, and a whole bunch more. I haven't got the whole list there, so I've gone too fast through those. But what I want to just point to you is if you want to look at what programs you might be eligible for, and the rules keep changing and the amounts keep changing, so you need to be up to speed with those when you're going to make those decisions. Go to solar.vic.gov.au, government website, and check out what might be eligible. Generally, they don't give you more than one bite of the cherry. So if you've got one rebate for, say, solar hot water, you don't get the solar PV one. Or if you've got the solar PV one, you won't get the battery program one. They're trying to spread out the benefit to as many people as possible. And this is just a little explainer about the way those renewable energy certificates work. Now, this does have some relevance to community energy systems too, but only if they're less than 100 kilowatts. Now, I mentioned that there's a scheme called the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme. It only covers systems up to 100 kilowatts. So your eligibility ceases. Well, in fact, it's up to 99.999 kilowatts. Once you hit 100, you're out of the scheme. It's not pro rata. And that scheme was set up decades ago, 2010, I think, and it's been running ever since. But like I said, it's in its wind down days where what's known as the deeming period keeps dropping off each year until 2030 when it finishes. It also has what's known as the zone multiplier, that basically Australia's divided into 4 levels of sunniness, and we're in unfortunately, the least sunniness zone. 1.185 is our multiplier. If you're in, say, Alice Springs, it's 1.65, I think, from memory. So you get more certificates if you live in a sunnier place for a system. But that scheme has been very effective in the uptake of solar. I threw this one in because I keep talking about energy and your usage. And for many people, electricity bills are like tax returns. They're really complicated things to read. Try to understand how much you're using, where the opportunities for savings are. So I've highlighted a few fields in one of these things. One thing that's kind of useful to know is what your daily consumption is. And generally, they'll put a graph on there showing your daily consumption this quarter, the previous quarter, maybe going back 4 quarters, so you can see how you're tracking. For instance, if you get unexpectedly large increases in your bill, it could be actually because you're using more energy rather than just that they're charging you more for electricity. So keeping an eye on your average consumption is a good one. Unfortunately, electricity is kind of sold in an unusual way. Not many products do you take away from the store and then 3 months later pay for them. That's a long time on a credit card, but that's the way electricity is sold. And you don't even know how much you've used. You don't get a receipt when you walk out the door. You just find out 3 months later how much you have to pay for that thing. And that means that people often get bill shock because they're not aware that their consumption patterns have changed recently, and they've been using a lot of energy, and then suddenly they get hit with the bill. So having ways of monitoring that, a bill is a very poor way of monitoring because it comes 3 months after the event. And if your property isn't readily accessible, that means they can't get to, there's hardly anyone with a dumb meter anymore. But if you did have a dumb meter, one that can't be read remotely, they can actually just guesstimate your usage for up to 3/4 before they actually have to break down the door and get in there and read it, to take one reading a year. But I think it's a moot point now because Victoria was the first to introduce remote read smart meters, and they don't need anyone walking around the street looking at them. So, yeah, I guess how do you keep track of your energy use on a more granular level? There are many products on the market that actually can display in the home. I'm not going to show any, but there are many, they're not very expensive, that actually just clip onto your existing power meter non-electrically. It's not even electrical work. It just uses the optocoupler on the front of the smart meter that flashes whenever you use a certain amount of power, counts the flashes, transmits that as a value. So in your home, you could have a little, what looks like a temperature gauge on your fridge or something, and it's telling you the rate that you're using energy at. Some of them even have alarms you can set. I know a friend said he's got a family with, I think, 3 kids and a wife, and they said if we use more than 5 kilowatts at any one time and the alarm goes off, someone's got to turn something off. So they set their own maximum limit in terms of power usage. And that's quite a good real-time way of measuring your energy consumption. Just a bit on the technology. So how does solar panels convert sunlight into electricity? They use things called inverters. Inverters take DC electricity, and hence the name, they invert what's a constant current into a alternating current. They invert it. So if one goes one way, then it goes the other way. So that's what they do basically. Solar inverters have come a long way in the 30 years I've been in the industry. They used to be fairly unreliable, rather expensive, very, very ugly, and with almost no features. These days they're smart, they're beautiful, they're super efficient. I mean, there's something like 97, 98% even efficient at converting solar energy to electricity. They almost invariably have some form of monitoring with them, like an app on your phone or a portal that you can log into. They can talk via Wi-Fi and Ethernet to your network. And they can also be smart enough to know how to control some loads. So many inverters will have the ability to communicate that they're running at a certain power level, and maybe your hot water service might turn on, for example. So that's the basic function of inverter, convert DC electricity into AC so you can use it in your home. They also optimize your solar panels for best performance. Now, this is a bit technical, but a solar panel has a sweet spot in terms of efficiency, in terms of voltage and current, and that sweet spot is known as the maximum power point. And inverters dynamically adjust the solar panel's output to get to that sweet spot. So that's a very important function. It's known as maximum power point tracking, and here's a fun fact. Every single inverter has an MPPT, a maximum power point tracker built in. It's an Australian invention. In 1983, Stuart Watkinson, a young electrical engineer in Queensland, invented the first maximum power point tracker. So, woohoo! You know, stump, jump, plow, Wi-Fi, and the maximum power point tracker. We're a pretty awesome nation. The location you put inverters, well, they're generally designed for outdoor installation as well as indoor, so they're weatherproof, but you don't want to put them in direct sunlight because they are basically doing a hard job. They're producing some heat in the process, even though they're 97% efficient. You put 7 or 8 kilowatts in and you're still going to have a few hundred watts of heat come off them. So you don't want to put them in the sun because that will possibly cause them to thermally derate. They don't blow up. In fact, they're extremely reliable in terms of safety, but they may not produce as much energy as they could because once they get to a certain temperature, they slow the solar panels down. They actually reduce their power output. And they also will alert you to when there's a problem, because to be honest, solar DC is a little bit dangerous, and you don't want it circulating around on your roof and where people can touch it. So they have to have an alarm system to detect that there is what's known as an earth fault. And even though they don't remove the fault, they'll raise an alarm, beep, 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 and you go and do something about it. Call your installer to come and shut it down and fix the problem. All right, we've got another question. So Jeff, thank you, Jeff. Jeff's just pointing out, referring to devices that are free of charge in the Victorian government under the Victorian Government Energy Upgrade Scheme. So thanks for that, Jeff. That's good to know. And Jonathan asks, who do you get in to service a solar PV system? Not all electricians I contacted deal with such things. Also, what do you do if you have an old inefficient inverter that has been playing up and installed in the wrong place? Okay, that's really, really good trifecta of questions there, Jonathan. So in terms of servicing a solar panel, it is licensed electrical work because they're operating at dangerous voltages, and it is a little bit of a speciality. So electricians do extra training for solar. It's a bit like getting your car serviced. If you have a diesel engine, you might want to go to a diesel mechanic, someone who actually knows about diesel engines. Solar systems are kind of a subset of electrical work, and so you want to look for a solar trained installer. Now there is, at the moment, last time I looked, over 8,500 accredited solar installers in Australia. So there's a lot of them out there. A normal licensed electrician is allowed to work on a solar system, by the way, but they can't access any government rebates because they've tied the rebates to training and accreditation, which actually has worked out well in terms of upskilling the industry. So you mentioned that not all electricians you contacted deal with such things. I think they're just being prudent there, that if they haven't got relevant training, they probably don't want to get into doing something that could be potentially unsafe for them. And your third question, what to do if you have an old inefficient inverter that's been playing up and installed in the wrong place? Well, unfortunately, the way the rebate system works is it doesn't cover anything but the solar panels. So if you were to get a new inverter, you would actually have to replace it at your own cost, unless it's a warranty issue. But replacing the whole system, funnily enough, actually this is quite a viable option, because you'll get new panels, you'll get current rebates, because you can claim the rebates multiple times as long as it's a whole system, and that will kind of bring you up to a modern, efficient system. It's a bit unfortunate to hear that it's been installed in the wrong place. I'm not sure if you mean like in the sun, but yeah, that you're probably wise to that now, Jonathan. So you would be maybe making a bit of a fuss if they try to put it back in the same place. Okay, and Lyndall asks, do microinverters have the same sweet spot and self-monitoring? The sweet spot are referred to as actually the solar panel, but the inverter finds it. That's what it does, and a microinverter is actually an inverter. In our latest iteration of our inverter standard, we've stopped referring to microinverters because they come in all sizes. So you get microinverters now that are 1,500 watts, which actually used to be the size of a standard inverter. Not very micro. What's micro about them, though, is they're physically very small. And I think I've just jumped a few slides with my throwing my arms around. Oh, yes, I have. I'll go back. So these are conventional, on the right-hand side, solar inverter. These are actually dated slides now. That probably won't be able to buy a Sunny Boy like that one anymore. And a battery inverter on the left. Battery inverters don't have solar panel inputs. They just have battery inputs. Typically, a battery inverter would be used as a way in conjunction with a solar inverter to build a whole system, or it may be a retrofit to an existing solar inverter. And if you're off-grid, you definitely need a battery inverter because you need to have storage. There's so-called hybrid inverters. It's really a marketing term, meaning they have a battery input and a solar input. So that means they can take solar energy, battery energy, and grid energy and do all sorts of things with all three. So that's a hybrid. And a hybrid, from a perspective of a new installation and someone who is either now or in a short period of time considering having battery storage, is a very good choice. You can actually install a hybrid inverter without batteries, or most of them you can. and they're called battery ready. So they've got a plug and socket port at the bottom there, ready for the battery system at a later stage. But just beware that they're very specific about which battery they could use generally. So you don't want to leave it too long because the company might stop making that particular brand or model of battery. So if you're going for battery ready on a hybrid inverter, do the battery upgrade within a year or two. Otherwise, you might be disappointed. They might say, oh, we don't make those batteries anymore. It won't suit your inverter. There you go. Unfortunate. And then we've got this strange category, which I call AC batteries. A battery is always DC. It's got a positive terminal and a negative terminal. But sometimes it's put in a box with an inverter, such as a Tesla Powerwall, and it's called a battery. But actually, it's a battery and an inverter all together in a box. Very, very sleekly designed unit. So not really truly an AC battery, but it does produce DC power that's converted to AC, and you never have access to the battery discreetly. It's always through the output of the inverter. Almost up to your question, Lyndall, because I actually did have some pictures of microinverters, but before we get on to microinverters, I just want to, in fact, I just looked at the time. We're going to have a break in a couple of minutes. Just as I said, there will be a midpoint break just to stretch your legs and get a glass of water. But I'll just answer Lyndall's question after this slide. There are devices that can make solar panels work better when there is poor conditions, such as shading in some parts of a system. Now, if the whole solar panel system is under a tree, it's going to be bad all the time, but maybe a tree casts a shadow for part of the day, or a chimney or other obstruction on a few of the panels. Now, those few panels that have that obstruction actually have a roll-on effect across the whole system, because a conventional solar panel system, all the panels have to work together. It's kind of like being on a tandem bike. You've all got to pedal the same. If the person on the back's sort of not pedaling, it's going to be hard work. And that's what shading does to a panel. It's like the person on the back of the tandem not pedaling. It's just not pulling its weight and dragging the whole system down a bit. Now, these devices, known as solar panel optimizers, are kind of like a neutral gear, as it were, for them to extend this silly analogy, on a tandem bike. It disengages that lazy person at the back, and the other panels can work well. It also allows that lazy person on the back of the bike still to pedal a little bit and contribute just a little bit, but without having any large impact or any impact to the rest of the system. So solar panel optimizers, great idea if you have some shading issues on parts of your system. Now, these are DC devices. That means DC in from the panel and DC out to the inverter. But there are also things known as microinverters. I just realized I've got one more slide before I get to the microinverter, Lyndall. And these are, this slide is really showing how these panels all have those optimizers on them. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a panel which is right next to the western side of the second story, and it's got shade on it, and it will have shade every morning. So that panel, its performance is darker. You see on the slide, panel number 1.1.4 is a bit less producing than all the rest. That's fine, because the optimizers let that panel work at a slower rate than all the others. So there you go. Great idea. Now, last one before our break, Lyndall, to answer your question. Yes, microinverters do operate solar panels at their sweet spot, as does any inverter. Why they're often called microinverters is they're small enough to be mounted underneath the panel. Many of them are sort of, 10, 15 centimeters square. Usually there's no display. Maybe there might be an LED light just to say it's on or it's faulty, but they're hidden underneath the panels where they're out of the sun, so that protects them from heat. They've got a little bit of an air gap, so they're not touching the panel, and they're producing AC power on your roof from one panel. So each panel puts out AC panel power via a microinverter. And these systems mean that every single panel is an independent entity. You don't even have to have the same types and sizes of panels. You could have a really ugly system made up of 20 different sizes, brands, panels, or more likely you've upgraded and you've got some of your older panels and you've got some of your newer ones and they're different sizes. It doesn't matter. Microinverters all work independently and contribute to the power in the home. So there you go. So what I want to do now is just have a very short break, let's say 5 minutes. I'm just going to blank my screen. The recording will continue. Go and grab yourself a glass of water and stretch your legs and come back here in 5 minutes. Okay, see you then. Well, welcome back, everyone. I managed to jam a couple of pieces of pizza into me and a glass of water. So thank you for the very kind compliment, Mary. We've got another little bit of feedback and question from Jonathan. So thank you, Jonathan. So I'll just take a few questions before I start back on again. The question from Jonathan is, I'm wondering about brands of inverters and panels. Which ones would you recommend and avoid? My jokey answer to that one is really, I'll tell you in 25 years, but it's also kind of realistic, is that the technology is relatively new. I mean, solar panels were invented in 1956. That's a long time ago. But really, in terms of commercial production, that wasn't till the 70s. And they were very, very expensive back then. We were talking, $100 a watt in 1970. But large-scale production of solar panels really ramped up in the 2000s. So we're seeing prices dramatically drop in the 2000s. But we also saw a lot of poor quality product being produced. Now, how can you tell a poor quality panel from a high quality panel? Unless you're a photovoltaic engineer, you wouldn't notice the difference. They look indistinguishable. But what is different about them is the materials that have been used to make them. So some of those materials will discolor with age. So there's a encapsulant which holds the glass to the cells. It starts to yellow. So if your panels are starting to change color after a few years, you've probably got counterfeit encapsulant. It's not UV stable encapsulant. The back sheet on a solar panel is actually the electrical insulation and moisture barrier for the whole electrical system of the panel. Some of those back sheets actually were no better than contact adhesive. They look like a genuine high quality back sheet, but they were just some cheap contact adhesive that peeled off after a matter of months and fell on your roof. And that kind of really dodgy, low quality product probably peaked around 2011, 2012 in Australia, because Australia became a dumping ground for cheap solar panels. I know this because I was lecturing in Beijing and to a whole bunch of PV engineers, and during one of the breaks, one of them came up to me and in a rather polite and almost confused voice, he said, "Excuse me, Professor." They called me Professor. Well, I like that. "Excuse me, Professor, why does Australia buy our worst solar panels?" He was confused why people were ordering the cheapest, worst panels. And it was because of our incentive schemes. And also, you could say some carpetbagging business structures, buying the cheapest panels, getting the rebate for the customer and disappearing overnight and just shutting down the business. So we became a dumping ground for really poor quality solar panels in that period. And there were also some good ones, so I wouldn't badge them all the same. But what's happened in the interim is the market has matured. The Australian regulator has introduced an approved product scheme. So solar panels have to be confirmed they're not counterfeit, because there was actually a lot of counterfeit product that it might have said brand A, but it was brand Z, really, with brand A stickers on it. And so that's been wiped out with a proper regulatory system around approved solar panels, approved inverters, approved battery systems. On top of all that, China's actually stopped offering incentives to all but a very few of the top companies, because there was a very strong export incentive program in China. And so every company making T-shirts one day, solar panels the next day to get access to that incentives program. China wound that back to just a handful of the major manufacturers. And so we've really now got just the good quality panels predominantly being sold in Australia. But even then, there'll be some which might have some problems because of manufacturing defect, and that's where warranties come around. You really want to make sure that the panel you're buying is from a reputable supplier who has an office in Australia who can honour their warranty. So some of that might be your due diligence. That's the best I can do, Jonathan. It's got a lot better than it was, but I really can't give you some hit name brands. I've been stung. I've thought I had a good quality panel. Turned out it wasn't. Just was a bad batch. These things happen. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen again. Find the button for it. There we go. And I'll just go back a slide. I just finished explaining to Lindell about microinverters. And now just to finish the technology review, batteries. Now, I said right at the onset that a battery system may not actually be a sensible financial choice if you're trying to save money, because chances are that the payback period is about the same as the warranty or the end of life. So it's really probably cost neutral, not an actual savings. But if you need other services, such as you want to be able to have backup during a grid outage, then that's a benefit that it's hard to put a price on what that is. Just the convenience of not losing power. There are many types of battery systems. You may have heard of lead acid. Lead acid was a technology developed 150 years ago, but it's unfortunately rather inefficient compared to modern chemistries, but it actually has got some green credentials. You might think lead's not a very green kind of product, but actually lead is the most recycled product on the planet by weight. Almost every lead acid battery becomes another lead acid battery because it's very easy to recycle them. And they're cost positive at the end of life. That means you get paid money to take them away rather than becoming e-waste. But they're really not a popular choice anymore because of their low capacity for weight ratio, usable capacity of only about 50% of their rated value, and also not very high performance compared to modern battery systems like lithium ion. So yeah, in the residential market and in the utility market at the moment, lithium ion is pretty dominant, but things may change. We may have picked on a chemistry that is going to be another resource scarcity, and it's already starting to show signs of that. There's only a handful of lithium mines in the world, so may well turn out to be not such a great technology, but there are many others chomping at the bit to replace it. So yeah, for the time being, lithium ion's probably the most common choice. Can batteries be retrofitted? Yes, you can certainly add batteries to an existing system. Oh, there's a cute picture of my son when he was little. He's 8 years old now. And you can add them by adding a generic product. So you don't actually have to have the same brand inverter as you have a battery system. They can be different brands. They're basically what's known as AC coupled to each other just by connecting both of them to a switchboard. There may be some restrictions in terms of how much capacity that you can add to your home, how many inverter systems you can have. So a battery with an inverter is an inverter system, and your solar system is an inverter system. And you may find that in our area, AusNet might say maximum is 5 kilowatts, or they might give you a little bit extra. They might say 5 kilowatts of export plus 5 kilowatts of self-use. So there will be some limits. They're generally much higher if you have a three-phase installation, but they're not so common in residential applications. I'm just going to skip over the monitoring for a bit, and I'm going to start moving on to community batteries. So I'm just going to stop sharing this slide here and see how to do this. Share a web page. There it is. I think I've got it. You might have to tell me, are you seeing YEF community batteries? I see Russell waving at me. Thank you, Russell. It's always kind of a bit of uncertainty when you share your screen, what's showing up. Hopefully nothing inappropriate. All right. So I've actually got a few tabs here, which are the gist of today is really about community energy. And so I've covered some of the technologies of residential storage, residential photovoltaic systems, energy efficiency. Now, when it comes to community energy systems, how do you benefit from it not being yours, being owned by the community? And what is that community? Is it a geographical community? Is it a philosophical community, like could be an organisation who have members scattered across an area. All of those things could actually fall into the concept of community. One of the great things about electricity is it really doesn't care where you are. If there is a network that connects you, you are effectively part of the same organism. It's like a body. The national electrical market, the national energy market, which is what technically is the whole of the east side of Australia, from far north Queensland right around to South Australia, is all one giant interconnected electrical network. It's actually the longest electrical network in the world, continuous. And energy can move around that network, but an electron in Queensland doesn't have to make its way all the way to South Australia to be useful. It's still displacing energy in different parts of the system. So that's kind of the big picture about how energy is moved. It doesn't really move, it's just displacing energy somewhere else. So that means that the benefit for a community can be moved away from co-location to ways of monitoring, metering, and aggregating lots of different systems together. So the Yarra Energy Foundation in Melbourne recently launched this community battery. Now, I was supposed to go to the opening, but I couldn't make it, unfortunately. Under that cover that you can see with the cute name Pixie is a battery system that allows energy to be traded onto the wholesale electricity market, and also provides services to that market, which is known as Frequency Control Ancillary Services, or FCAS for short. There's your first rather technical acronym for the evening, FCAS. FCAS, there we go, FCAS. FCAS is where you offer a service to help stabilize the grid. Typically that will be whenever there is an excessive demand of power on the grid, you can help. And whenever there's by exporting a little bit of power from a battery, and whenever there's a deficit, a surplus of power on the grid, you can import into that battery some of that surplus. So it's just helping balance the system out, stopping kind of imbalance of generation and load. And even though it might look like a relatively small battery system, that replicated many times over many locations actually has a really big impact. So it's kind of like the FCAS service is trying to stop someone falling off a cliff by just holding onto their shirt with your tip of your fingers. You don't actually have to hold the whole weight of the person. You just grab them before they start to tip and you pull them back. I just made up that analogy. I hope that's a good one. FCAS does that to the electrical system. When it starts to go the wrong way, it just pulls it back a little bit and stabilizes everything. Now that actually is providing a very, very fundamental and useful service to the whole of the electricity market, and you get paid for it. So doing what's essentially a very small amount of work, but at the right time, when required, within hundreds of milliseconds, we're talking very fast response, you actually help stabilize the grid and you get a reward for that. So that's one of the services that a community battery can offer. Probably the most well-known one in our region is Totally Renewable at Yackandandah. Now, they've taken it a step further. They're not just providing a service that can store energy for providing services to the network, but they can also offer resilience. Now, resilience is where you can island part of a electrical network. So let's say the feeder lines going into some part of Yackandandah get a tree fall across them, the high voltage falls down, and what would normally happen is all the lights go out. But where you've got a system that can independently support a small number of houses, it can carry on providing power to that part of the network, even though the main supply has been broken. And so that's a really beneficial feature of a community energy system, especially in areas, in regional areas where you might have long supply lines or transmission lines, to be technical, servicing them. It's got to the point where in parts of Australia, particularly initially in Western Australia, the utilities now are getting rid of their transmission lines and replacing with community energy systems, or even just individual standalone systems on rural properties. Turns out that it's way cheaper for them to put in, $100,000 to $500,000 system to power a house than it is to supply via long distance transmission lines, which are prone to outages due to climate events or even just maintenance of those lines. So we're seeing a very significant transition away from everything connected together to lots of islanded or potentially islandable systems like Yackandandah. So they're still connected to the utility grid, but they have a little bit of independence. I'm not quite familiar with exactly what it's powering, but it's able to work to some level of independence. So that's totally renewable Yackandandah. This third one is, I've only really discovered this piece of equipment actually, known as the SolShare recently, and I met with some of their engineers today just to get briefed on it. If you are and I started off the talk about this, that 1 in 10 people in Australia live in a multiple occupancy building, and that generally means they can't have their own solar on the roof because it's owned by the body corporate. And if you were to put solar on a body corporate, generally it would only benefit things like the hall lighting because that's a collective expense. And so, it just doesn't make much sense putting 50 kilowatts of solar on the roof just to power the hall lights for the body corporate, the rest of it being exported to the grid for very, very small return. But this company, Illume, which is a Melbourne-based company, produced a product. It's an award-winning product. They've actually selling it now in the UK and in the US. It's not an inverter. It kind of looks a bit like an inverter. It's actually a very smart piece of switchgear that allows one or multiple large solar systems to be shared amongst many occupants. It's a little bit technical how it works, but effectively you can allocate how much energy is renewable supplied to each occupant in the building. And let's say you're all very equal about how you do things. You might say everyone can have 1/15, because let's say the system, each of those units can supply 15 apartments, 1 unit. You have multiple units, by the way, but let's say you got 1 unit, one SolShare. It can supply 15 units, and you all get 1/15 of the production of the system averaged over a monthly period. So even though you might use energy at different times of the day, some people use it during the evening, some use it during, it's got to be during daylight hours, sorry. Some use it in the morning and some use it in the middle of the day and some use it more in the afternoon. You all get the same kilowatt hour sharing of the energy production, and whether you use it or you export it, you get the benefit of the export as well. So it's a great system for multiple occupancy buildings, even things like shopping centres, though, where you've got tenants within a building, but you have a common roof area. Those would be the best applications for it. So it allows 1 in 10 Australians to actually have a solar system, even though they don't own their roof. So I was pretty excited by that. Now I'm just looking down at the questions here. Oh yes, thank you, Jeff. So Jeff, just backtracking slightly, Jeff provided a link to a website called solarquotes.com.au. Now, one way of finding out what quality looks like is to ask people who've already had a product for some time or have had it installed and what the experience was like. And SolarQuotes is a service that provides, I think it's 3 free quotes, but you can also look at the reviews from the people who've had systems installed by those companies and get a sense of what the quality of their workmanship is. But also they produce a lot of informative blogs and videos about solar products in general. So yeah, it's a really, really good site. Thanks for reminding me of that one, Jeff. It's actually run by Finn Peacock, a friend of mine who's a chartered engineer who started it some years ago because he was frustrated about the quality of the solar system he was sold. So a bit like you, Jeff, turn anger into action. Okay. We're starting to get near the end of this evening. So if you've got some questions you've been hanging on to, whether you want us just to ask me or type them in, feel free to interrupt me at this point. Okay, so I think I'm still sharing my screen. Are you still seeing my screen? Yes, thank you, Lyndall. I can see you nodding. That's great. So I'll just stop scrolling this. ARENA, which is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, which, by the way, we nearly lost them. The head was on the chopping block just before the last election, have done some wonderful things in supporting renewable energy initiatives and providing some funding for that, but also some research and project support. Now, this is an article on their website about implementing community scale batteries. And if I scroll down, some of the lessons learnt about that implementation. So they've looked at what has already been done in Australia to find out whether they're financially viable. And there we go again, particularly if FCAS markets can be accessed. So FCAS, you need to have a electricity retailer license. So you have to partner with a retailer to be able to access that part of the market. Reducing local network tariffs. Now, remember I said energy from Queensland actually can, have an impact in South Australia, but the electrons don't actually move all the way, but the force is still applied. And so you've got congestion points on a network where there's just too much nudging of electrons in one part of the network. And so if you're trying to send a lot of generation from Queensland all the way to South Australia, that's a very poor distribution model. What's a much better one is energy is being generated and used in a local region. And one way of doing that is with battery storage. So it solves the problem of nighttime, basically. So you've got a community-owned small solar farm, or it might even be just on a commercial building or government-owned building. It's producing energy. That energy can be transmitted a short distance across to a network storage battery, and that battery then can supply the energy back at nighttime to the local area. Now that saves a lot of transmission, and that's actually reducing the cost of electricity too, because electricity pricing is partly what they call transmission, which is your high voltage long distance lines, and local LV distribution, DUOS it's called. So those the last few kilometre runs is also part of the charge for electricity. So reducing transmission losses and costs actually help reduce the price of electricity. Households care more about more than just affordability when it comes to energy storage. That's a bit of a motherhood statement. I'm not quite sure where they're going with that one. And network tariffs and market signals shape how the battery actions contribute to the hosting capability. So market signals are things like when there is negative pricing. You might think, hang on, you always pay for electricity. Surely you don't get charged to generate electricity? Yes, you do. That's actually starting to happen now, negative pricing. Not so much on a customer level, unless you happen to be on one of those very esoteric retailers who sell you straight off the wholesale market. Amber Electric would be one, I think. Is that if the electricity market doesn't need your energy and you are still pushing it out there, they're going to penalise you for it and charge you to send surplus energy back onto the network. So that's when a battery comes to the rescue. Rather than be charged to actually give away your electricity, you store it in a community battery. So that's another benefit. There's a couple of acronyms in there which I just want to touch on in that points 5, 6, and 7. DER. Every industry or every organisation or community even have their little favourite acronyms. They're TLAs. You heard that one? 3-letter acronyms, TLAs. Yep. So DER is distributed energy resources. It's a fancy way of saying batteries and solar scattered around the place. Distributed energy resources, as opposed to centralised generation. Like a coal-fired power station is the opposite of DER. The beauty of DER is it's where generally it's being used. So if you've got solar on your home and you're using the power in your home, that's fantastic from a efficiency point of view, from a green credentials point of view, but also from the network's point of view. They're not having to handle your electricity. It's just being self-consumed. So DER, distributed energy resources, really is going to be the major part of our evolution of our electricity network, sometimes called Grid 2.0. The term NEM, I've already mentioned that. That's the National Electricity Market, which really is the east coast of Australia, is a single market where electricity is traded. There's a certain amount of state control on some of that as well, state-owned generation, but also private generation. Point number 7, only DNSP-owned community-scale batteries currently require regulatory exemptions. DNSP is a very fancy name for your power network company. So in our area, AusNet is a DNSP, Distributed Network Service Provider. It's a really kind of technical name for something basic most people call the utility. So there you go. Lastly, on point 8, we've got those last 2 acronyms, BTM, behind the meter. Now, point number 8 says industry professionals saw significant potential benefits of community scale batteries, including over behind the meter. So behind the meter is the point at which the demarcation between what you own and control and what the network owns and controls. And so behind the meter is on the customer side. The virtual power plant, VPP, is a terminology used to call when you aggregate together lots of disparate systems and control them as if they're one, kind of like a hive mind. So let's say everyone's got a 10 kilowatt hour battery and a 6.6 kilowatt PV system on their roof, and it's nighttime, so the sun's not shining, and the network suddenly needs more input. They've just shut down your lawn 1 or 2 or whatever, A or B. Suddenly we need more input at this moment. So a VPP is where, through communication, and we're talking tens of or hundreds of milliseconds, even faster, a signal is sent out to all of those small systems across a very large geographical area. Please give us your power now. And that's a power plant. So currently we've got, I think it's about 13 gigawatts of solar installed on the NEM, on rooftop solar. That's a huge power plant if you aggregate that together. I'm not sure how much battery storage there is, because that's been a little bit hard to spot, because not all of it gets registered, but it's now falling under mandatory registration with the Clean Energy Regulator. So soon we'll have a better picture of how much distributed storage there is. But when it's part of a solution known as a virtual power plant, which is something you would enter with a retailer, whether that's your electricity retailer or an aggregator, then that lots of those small systems can actually act like a giant power station. So there you go. VPP will become more and more the norm for any generation and storage system in Australia. South Australia's already kind of made it virtually mandatory, because they're trying to deal with a very large proportion of renewables. On a sunny day, South Australia is 100% renewable. And so they actually have too much solar, and they need some way of controlling it. So VPP is part of that solution. Russell's asked a question here. Glenn, do you know anything about AusNet super switches for islanding on large scale? No. Sorry, Russell, you got me there. Sounds cool though. Super anything is cool, but super switches, wow. Maybe you can tell me, maybe not during this presentation. It sounds like a bit of a geeky subject, but good one, Russell. And I'm looking at the time here. I'm just going to go back to my presentation, because I didn't actually finish that and I deliberately jumped in and out of it. And if I can find it again, there it is. Share screen. Okay, so you should see economic analysis on the screen. Lyndall's nodding, thank you. You're my nodder because you're right at the top of the screen on my side there, so I can see you really clearly, thank you. So I just, coming back to the small scale now, this is actually a house in Thomas Road in Healesville. It's actually a friend's house that we put solar on. And I just wanted to show, like this is a map north at the top. And what we did was we put solar panels on the east and the west side of the roof because it better matched the energy usage pattern. Now, how do you know it's going to be a better match? That's where some form of analysis comes in. How do you analyze a customer's energy usage and work out what's the best place to put solar panels, both in terms of how much energy they'll produce, but also when they'll produce it and how useful at what time of day that will be, is looking at their consumption. Now, we're fortunate in Victoria to have almost universal adoption of smart meters. I know some people weren't so keen on them, but we've got them. And what they do is they measure energy and record it in intervals, typically 30-minute intervals or less sometimes. And those intervals are stored and used to bill you. But it's actually your data because it's kind of like a receipt. And so most of the electricity retailers make that interval data available through a secure login so you can get access to it. It's usually an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file that you can download, and it doesn't make any sense at all to the average person. But you give that to a company who can analyze your energy consumption, like one of the better solar companies, and they'll look at it and go, we can see that your pattern of energy use is mostly in the late afternoons, and so we think we'll put a system on the west side of your roof because that's when most of your self-consumption will occur. So I did two little analysis because I actually have a software company that does this kind of stuff, and we did it on this house in Healesville. We did two proposals. One was with solar only, so no battery, and this was done probably 6 or 7 years ago, so prices may have changed since we did this. No, not that long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so the payback on this system is around about 5 years, and this is modelled based on Bureau of Meteorology solar radiation data, so it's a very accurate assessment of the performance of the system. And you can see that with solar panels having typical design lives of 25 years, you're so cost positive it's not funny if you happen to live that long, or stay in the house that long after even 10 years. So definitely a winner in terms of 5-year payback. But let's add a battery system to that and see what happens. And the payback really starts to push out. So the price, the investment goes up, but you're not actually generating any more clean energy. What you are doing is less of it is being exported to the grid and getting a poor rate of return from a feed-in tariff, and you're storing it and using it at night time. So this worked out not too bad at 8 years and 10 months. The warranty on that battery, typically they're around a 10-year mark. So you probably just get a little bit of benefit on the 9th and 10th year in terms of your financial returns. Now, I'm not going to say that a battery is a bad idea. It's just that it's a matter of price, and prices are going down. So it's really just a matter of time before that starts to look like a reasonable investment. I'm supposed to say I don't provide financial advice at this point. So there you go, just to keep the lawyers happy. I'm just getting to the wind up here, Jeff, because Jeff's going to have a few words at the end. But I thought I'd just show you a picture of my house. And I live on a community, and we have a community power system, which is a microgrid. It consists of 7 homes plus 4 or 5 of my labs, multiple EV charging stations. We've actually got a 50 kilowatt DC charger, 3 22 kilowatt AC chargers, and 3 dedicated trickle charging points with battery storage for overnight charging of electric vehicles. So we've now got 7 electric vehicles. I think there's 4 full EVs and 3 plug-in hybrids here on the co-op. So charging vehicles is quite a big part of what we use energy for here. But just looking at that picture of my house, I've got quite a lot of solar on it, but I've also got solar PV, solar hot water, sorry, and some of that solar energy is also used to heat water through a diversion system that turns solar DC into heat directly using a DC-DC converter, and also through an inverter as well from DC to AC. So I've got multiple ways of heating water with both photovoltaics and thermal systems. Now that's a picture of where, for those who are coming on Sunday, the 13th of November, you'll be coming to. This is Miramura Community Cooperative, and we're on top of Mount Tilibuong. I'm not sure if my mouse is visible. Is my mouse visible to you people? It is, okay. So that's my house there, right in the middle. There's actually 7 houses here. It's a bit hard to see them all, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 down here, a tiny house, 6, and there's a big house, 7. And they're all connected in a little electricity grid to a centralized microgrid system. And off in the distance, you can see one of the 2 solar trackers. There's 2 36 kilowatt trackers out in the paddock, so it gives us 70 kilowatts of tracking solar. Tracking means it follows the sun from morning to afternoon. It's what's called an east-west tracker. That little thing there is 90 meters long. It's quite an awesome thing to watch move. And there's some of our food production zones, some paddocks for animals, etc., and a wind ornament. There's a rather large wind turbine that doesn't work. I jokingly like to say that Miramura is where wind turbines come to die. It's been not a very happy story with wind for us. So solar has really kind of won the day. And just lastly, that's now probably about a, 8-year-old photo, but yeah, there's a bunch of people. There's 70 people roughly, including kids. I think about 42 members live here in 30 homes. So happily since 1974, though of course there's been a lot of change over those periods. I think probably the average occupancy would be around the 10 to 15 years mark, but we've got members who've been there since 1974. A few of them only recently left and moved into the retirement homes. So yeah, it's quite a fun place. There you go. So that's where I live. And I think it's time to hand back to Jeff.
Okay, thanks very much, Glenn. Very, very interesting presentation. Some of the stuff I've heard before in many of your talks, but a lot of new material as well. So thank you for that. And what I'd like to do is just help people who aren't familiar with community renewable energy, how these individual systems that you've talked about can actually be facilitated by the local community. You saw tonight all of the questions that were coming up. And if you have a community renewable group, you can actually run events to like this one, and you can run them face-to-face, where you can get a speaker like Glenn and answer questions for the local community. But in addition to that, you can also do some homework yourself as an organization and go out and find a reputable solar company and installer, or a company that supplies and installs heat pumps like Reclaim Energy, as we do, or a company that puts in reverse cycle air conditioners. And you can set up your website so that people can find out all sorts of information about these different systems, and they can register their interest in getting a quote from your recognized installer, and the installer that you've vetted and checked out. And that's a service that you can provide for your community, where people don't actually have to go out and do all of the hard yards themselves. Healesville Core has been doing that, and that's also what a lot of other community energy groups around Australia are also doing. And it's a great way to facilitate individual homeowners and businesses to get information that's required. But the other thing you can do is raise money, either by getting people to donate money to you or getting grants. And we did this before the last Conservative government came in. There was an election and they had money available that was being doled out to the community for a range of different projects. And we said we wanted $90,000, we could use $90,000 to put in 3 energy systems on 3 not-for-profit buildings. So we got $90,000 from Tony Smith, our local member of parliament, and the 2 went up a couple of years ago, and the final one went up this year. One went on to a kindergarten, another onto a living and learning centre, and another on a Catholic primary school. And those three systems were able to be installed because we provided that $90,000 to the three organisations as an interest-free loan. And they pay that money back from the savings on their systems, so that they get savings themselves anyway, but on the additional money that they save, they put that back into our bank account. And over a period of time, this creates a revolving fund where we have funds that are available that we can make available for other community groups as well, for not-for-profits to put solar systems on their rooftop. And those three systems, over the lifetime of those systems, are going to save the local community well over $1 million, which is money that otherwise would have gone out to retailers. Now it's being held back in the community, and those organisations can utilise that money so that they can benefit their users, and the community overall benefits as well. Totally Renewable Yakandanda did something similar by putting solar panels on their local hospital, and there are all sorts of projects that a community energy group can get involved in. When we established the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, we also got involved with an industry, what we call an industry partner, because none of the people in our organisation have got any technical knowledge. I actually come from an educational and psychotherapy background, so the stuff that Glenn was talking about tonight, I know very little about. Yeah, so what we did was we got involved with an industry partner. They provided all the technical expertise with funding from the grant that we got from the state government, and they did a feasibility study on a solar car park for Healesville in one particular location that had solar panels plus battery for storage and also EV chargers. And the local business was also going to be able to access energy from that system and save them money as well. So that happened because the local community energy group was able to pal up with an industry consultant and with the local community, and to bring all of these resources together to get a solar system to be established. That's still in the feasibility stage at the moment. A business case has been worked out for it, but the installation is still some time off. Additionally, our industry partners also did some research and a feasibility study on a solar farm down at Bunyip, with, I think, also a battery was included with that, and EV chargers as well. And I won't go into all of the different projects that we worked on, but these are the sorts of things that local people can do. You don't need to have technical knowledge. You just need to be reasonably intelligent, have some time available to put into this, work together collectively. And when you do work together collectively, you can do a lot more than one person on your own. And it's amazing just what a community can achieve, and how much good you can do for the local community. This creates a good feeling in yourself with what you can do for your local community and for your planet, but also the people that get involved, the volunteers in the group, get a good feeling about their involvement in it, and the people who are benefiting also get a tremendously good feeling from it as well. So it's a nice way to support, I think, the empowerment of the local community and the mental well-being and vibrancy of the local community as well. So Glenn was focusing tonight on all of the technical aspects to do with the individual systems, but rest assured that as a community energy group, you can put all of this together to help your local community. And I did put up a question right at the beginning for those of you who were a little bit late, from Morag, who is your next teacher next Wednesday. She asked, what type of community energy projects interest you the most? So from the sort of things that Glenn has talked about tonight and that I have mentioned, if anything sparks your interest, just put it down in the chat for Morag, and we will make a copy of that and provide that for her so that she's got some additional information about your interests for next time. So we've got 3 more teachers. Morag, Dr. Morag Mackay is coming in next week, and she's going to be talking a lot about local community energy groups and how they function, the sort of work that they do, and how you can get involved with them. After that, the following week, we're going to have Lucinda Flynn. And Lucinda's great. She was teaching our volunteers at the Box Hill Institute on how to provide advice for homeowners. And I see Graham is here tonight from Healesville. He participated in that course, and I think everybody who participated, and Lyndall and Tim as well, okay. So they participated in that course, and we got some excellent feedback from what people were learning on it. And then the final one will be Gerald Ahrens from Como Energy, who was one of the 2 people working as our industry partners, and he will talk with you about the sort of things that the industry partners can do when they partner up with a community energy group, and the sorts of projects that you can get involved with to support your local community. That's all for tonight. I'd like to thank you again, Glenn, very much for an excellent presentation, very interesting. I'd like to thank Tom, who's been sitting there in the background, handling all the tech side for us. Thank you very much, Tom. Tom's going to organise the video after this. We'll let you know when it is available, so you can have a look at it again if you like, or share it with friends. And many thanks also to Mary from Emerald and Miriam from Pakenham for hosting this system, this session for us tonight. And we have another session on Saturday morning, which this will be the same session with Glenn, repeated at Pakenham, and we're looking forward to doing that as well. So thank you all very much for attending tonight, and look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 7 o'clock using the same link that you've got for this session you use for each of the sessions each week. So bye-bye for now.